So that three things thing has really helped me because I am a list maker. And if I have a list of like 100 different things that I'm supposed to be doing in my business, in theory, in order to be successful, I will get so overwhelmed that some days I'll do nothing. So instead, I circle three. And like if I can get all three of these done by the end of the day, and even if I can't get all of them done, but I can take steps towards them, then that's enough. And then I can feel confident in myself with the way that I handled my day.
Hello, welcome to the Life-Changing Habits podcast. I'm your host, Junsuke Ida. Today, I have the pleasure to interview a fellow coach, Katie Hurd. Katie is an American from Olympia, Washington. She is a bilingual Tokyo-based transition coach with a strong background in learning and development in a variety of industries in foreign and Japanese organizations. She is passionate about helping people raise their self-awareness to work and live satisfying lives across cultures. Katie first moved to Japan in 2006 to study in Aichi and has since moved back twice, once as an English teacher and again for a corporate job and her spouse. Now a mother of a 2-year-old, married to her Japanese partner for 10 years and having started her own business this year, Katie is no stranger to transition. Katie helps people outside of and in Japan to weather life transitions with more ease and come out stronger. She has helped clients move to Japan, coach students uncertain about their future, new mothers who are considering returning to the workforce, but who are struggling to renew their confidence postpartum, professionals working towards promotions or planning global careers, business owners, those who feel burnt out in Japan, and more. I'm very curious to discuss her experience in Japan and her techniques to help people reach their life goals and career ambitions. So with that, I'd like to welcome Katie Hurd. Katie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to join you.
The pleasure is all mine. So I want to get right into it. So could you start off by letting us know what you're up to? What is a transition coach? I think people are familiar with phrases like career coach or life coach, but what is a transition coach?
Yeah, so I'd actually been working as kind of a general life coach for this past like 18 months, and recently realized that a lot of what I was doing was around transition. So many people, they have where they are, and a lot of them don't even know quite what that is sometimes. And they're thinking about where they want to be, whether that's to change their career or to have their first child or to get married, or even to move away from Japan or move to Japan. And so they have a hard time seeing what that would look like, or have a lot of anxiety or feelings of maybe not having enough confidence to do what they want to do. Or they could already be in the transition and feeling like they're struggling, or the things are not panning out the way that they expected. So a transition coach is really great at supporting people who are going through a transition or who are about to go through a transition, and kind of helping them to have a better experience and get to where they want to be and be successful with that transition.
Right. So I guess helping people through big life changes, is something like that? Right. What are some things that what are the biggest things that people, have trouble with when they make these big life choices?
Oh my gosh, so many things. I think especially, I'm a mom, for example, and I never really expected what it would be like to have a child here. So kind of talking about my transition to living in Japan, I know some people come and they have culture shock, or they might come and they have that honeymoon period where everything's super exciting. And so I'd kind of gone the opposite, where I was kind of here for work for a while, and then I came back for my spouse. And there were a lot of times where I felt kind of off balance, like, when are we moving back home so that we can start the real life, the life that I'm supposed to have and the career I'm supposed to have, and all these supposed to and should have, that kind of attitude. And I'd kind of gotten over that and been like, no, Japan is where I'm supposed to be, and I'm happy to be here, and we have an amazing life, and there's so many things I love about Japan. But then after I had my son, I realized all the implications of having a salaryman husband and what that means in terms of the support that you have, or having friends move away that you've had a mutual support with. there's just so many aspects. And then what a career looks like in Japan when you're now raising a child and knowing you're probably not going to have as much support from your spouse. So there have been a lot of things that I've been a bit lucky with in terms of transitioning to motherhood and now starting my own business. But it's definitely not been the way that I expected. And there's so many things I just couldn't have known how they would pan out. So having a transition coach can be really helpful in learning to accept that you're not going to be 100% certain on a lot of things, and being kind of more comfortable with the way that things go, and also thinking about what you can control in your transition and preparing for that so that you can have a bit of a smoother journey in the process.
Yeah, I absolutely can relate to that. I think when people are going through a big transition, having someone who you can even just talk to, I think is really important when there's a lot of uncertainty. For instance, how does one kind of move out of, uncertainty to certainty and kind of get a sense of direction, when things are not what you're used to, I guess?
Yeah. And there could be so many answers to that question. Just as an example, let's say if a woman is considering whether to go back to work, sometimes there might be some mindsets she has about what she's supposed to do. There could be some mindsets about not feeling comfortable taking money from a spouse that's working because she's just watching the kids. There could be so many aspects at play. And so there's not really a right answer, whether the answer is that she needs to find a job that fulfills her and go back to work, or whether she needs to get comfortable and set some new boundaries or expectations with a partner about finances and the work that she's already doing as a mother. And also kind of expectations about a career, like what does she need to be doing now? It could be studying something, even if she wants to have a certain career 3 years from now or 10 years from now. So there's really no one right answer. And I think that can really give people a lot of overwhelm and confusion as to whether they're doing the right thing or if they can be happy with what they have. So part of it's just learning that there is going to be uncertainty, and to learn how to accept that and decide what you're not okay with being uncertain and do something about it.
Right. What does the process of figuring out look like? You mentioned a few things like accepting that there is going to be uncertainty, but what does the process look like going from uncertainty to kind of a little bit more clarity?
Yeah, I think somebody messaged me the other day, actually, and I thought what he said is so insightful, actually, which was, I asked him whether his circumstances need to change, whether his mindset needs to change, or whether both need to change to get the result that he wants or to feel the way he wants to feel. And he actually said, I think my circumstances are causing a lot of my problems, but if I don't change my mindset, then I can't change my circumstances. And that is so true to what I do a lot of times with coaching clients. They'll come in and they'll say like, yep, I need a career coach, or I want to go back to work, or something like that. But then when we get into it, all of these emotions and mindsets come out about should, and I think I should do this, and I'm having these boundary setting issues, and I lack confidence about this or that. And so we kind of have to go through those mindsets and figure out what mindsets do they want to throw away, what mindsets do they want to keep, what new mindsets might they need to get to where they want to go. Or do they now want to do something else once they've thought things through a bit more? So it's really a process of not just jumping right into, okay, let's look at what companies have jobs available, or like that kind of thing. It's more of like, what kind of life balance do you want to create? And then going from there and then hitting up those mindsets. And then once we're kind of clear on that, which may take a really long time as well, people might go through the exercises, and I don't think they would come out more overwhelmed, but they might come out saying, I'm still, uncertain, and that's okay now, because I am going to figure it out. So it's different for every person, really. In the process, it could take 4 sessions. It could take 10 sessions. There's also the matter of budget for some clients, but it's like every coaching program is different. And so kind of honed to the needs of what the client wants, and their own kind of discovery process about themselves.
Right. Okay, makes sense. So I guess you develop a vision for the life that you want to have, and then the rest instilling that confidence and the right mindsets, I guess, to help them move forward. What are some mindsets that have helped you along your path, let's say? You've certainly gone through a lot of transitions, but what are some mindsets that have helped you?
Yeah, I think some of the bigger ones are being adaptable. So many people will say things like, well, that's impossible for me, or I could never do that. And what I've learned through my own experiences and just kind of taking chances and sometimes doing things that make me really uncomfortable or that just scare me, is that you can do anything. A really good example is some people think I could never have a child because it's too hard or I wouldn't be a good parent or something. But then once you have a child, a lot of people realize that it's like one of the greatest loves you're going to have in your life. And so if you had kept that mindset of, oh, I don't think I can do it, you might not get there and realize you can do it. It's going to be hard, but it might be worth doing. And you have to decide if you're willing to take on the challenge and trust that you're going to be able to do it. And you'll develop the skills and the mindsets to get there.
Right. Adaptability. I want to dig a little bit deeper on that, because I think a lot of what Japanese people have trouble with is being adaptable. Because I think growing up in Japan is a very, I guess, ethnically homogenous society, and there's kind of strict culture norms. So being adaptable and being flexible is not really a Japanese strong suit. I hate to generalize. You mentioned getting uncomfortable. What are some things that you think makes someone more adaptable? Because I think it is, something that can be learned.
Yeah, just learning that everything is part of the process. I think some people, they think that if they study Japanese for like 5 minutes, that they'll suddenly be able to pass the N1 and go work in a Japanese corporation and everything's going to be handy dandy and wonderful. And it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of commitment and consistency to get there. And then once you get there, you realize that it's actually really challenging to work in a Japanese company as someone who hasn't grown up with the cultural understanding. It's almost in some ways more important than the language, is just knowing when to ask questions and how to communicate and how to take actions in a way that you're going to be able to not just get the results for the company, but also keep the peace, that wa. So I studied culture in university, and it wasn't until it was like hammered into my head in my first job at a big Japanese corporation where I was doing international management training. So I was conducting seminars that were sometimes like 2 weeks long for managers around the world. And we would always do 1 day of intercultural communication training. And so I watched a full day of intercultural communication training probably like 30 times in that span that I was working at that company. And just like reminding myself every time, like, it's not just you learn it and you're good and you can naturally apply it right in the moment every time. It's a process and you're going to fail a lot. So if you go into it saying, I'm going to fail a ton, I'm going to embarrass myself, this is going to be really hard, I'm going to want to cry at times, my boss is going to get angry at me at times, I'm going to have miscommunication with my colleagues at times that might affect my work, and go in with that mindset. But it's worth it because this is the career I want, this is the career I fought for, I studied so hard for this, I did the best I can to prepare, and now I've got to live it and try my best to apply these things. You've really got to be in that mindset, or you will get depressed, or you will feel like you're not getting results in some cases. If you expect it's just going to be perfect from the get-go, and you're not going to have to work hard and constantly readjust and adapt.
Right. I think that's incredibly valuable to have that mindset where it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to stand out sometimes. I mean, Japanese have this word, right? Deruku wa utareru. I think, well, if you do too well, you're going to get hammered down. And I think having to conform to a specific way of doing things, I think is a kind of things that foreigners might struggle with. But did you face a lot of pressure to conform to, I guess, the Japanese way when you came to Japan?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think that was part of why I had so much struggle and anxiety when the first few times I moved here, because I was trying to adapt. And it's funny because I think when you first come, you're not really trying to adapt. So you're making all these faux pas and you don't even know. So it's like that kind of blissful foreigner, gaijin smash, if you will, whatever.
Sure.
But working in corporations, especially in HR, where you're expected to deliver a really high level of professionalism, I felt so much pressure. And it wasn't just the pressure I felt, but I got a lot of pressure put on me by my bosses to conduct myself in a certain way. I had one guy who he would watch me deliver seminars, and as soon as we went on a break, every time he would like lay into me on everything I did wrong. And then I would have to stand up 10 minutes later and do it again. And so it was really hard to see eye to eye because he wanted me to do it the way a Japanese person would do it. But the audience was non-Japanese. It was mostly Westerners. And I know how to present to Westerners. So it was like, I felt I was right in what I was doing. But he was like, okay, but just do it a little bit more because that's what he thinks is right. That's what his normal is. So yeah, it's tricky, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think culture differences are, vast between, I think, the Western world and Japan. I think Asians can kind of get each other, understand each other to a better degree if they're other Asians, even like Korean or Chinese. I think they're a little bit more familiar, but I think Western culture, there's such a big contrast that I think whether you're a Japanese person going overseas or a foreigner coming to Japan, I think there's massive hurdles to go through. My mother certainly has several stories that she's, but so in terms of you've worked both overseas and in Japan. What are the biggest contrasts that you've noticed between the two environments? I think they're becoming more global, but what are the biggest contrasts you've noticed?
Yeah, I think the biggest one, and one that a lot of people will bring up, is the difference in, I mean, it is cultural, but how direct you can be. So I was working in the States for about a year in 2011, and I was working at an energy research company. So I was doing energy research, recruiting actually, and my boss would sit behind me, and so I'd have to basically talk people into having an energy survey done in their home, just as a bit of backstory. And so I would sometimes be joking around with them, like, yeah, you get some money, it's all good. And my boss would regularly be like cracking up behind me at the things I would say to people to sign them onto our program. And we would get really crazy people too on the phone, or people who'd be like, yeah, if you show up at my door, I'm going to shoot you, which is obviously scary. And so we would write all the crazy things people said down on this big board and look at it when we were having a bad day, and it would make us laugh. And so we just had such this great camaraderie, even working there less than a year. I was just best buds with all my colleagues, and really great relationship with my boss. She still regularly comments on my Facebook, actually. And so we have such a connection. And I feel like that's a lot more difficult to build here. There's definitely a feeling of private versus, company stuff, or personal versus company stuff. And I think that's something that acquaintances and friends of mine bring up a lot as well, is if you leave a Japanese company, a lot of times you kind of lose connection with the people. Even if you've been working there a long time, you lose connection with your boss, you lose connection with your colleagues a lot of times, which is kind of sad. And I don't think I ever reached quite the same level of camaraderie. There were a few people in my past jobs. Most of them were a bit more international minded. So we would lean on each other a bit and have that connection, which was really, really nice. But yeah, working in HR, it's a bit more difficult to do that, I guess, especially. So I guess that would be one of the biggest differences for me.
Right. Yeah. I the way I see it is, I think Japanese companies are, especially the traditional ones, are formed a little bit like tribes. So when you're there, you're part of the tribe, and everyone, gets along. Everyone goes drinking together. But once you're out of that company, you're out of the tribe at the same time.
Right.
The relationships you've built up kind of discontinue as well.
Yeah, that kind of in-group and out-group concept.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there are clear hierarchies as well in Japanese organizations. Yeah, that senpai kohai dynamic, how is that for you as a foreigner?
Yes. Yeah, it definitely changes things. I think that's a big part of the reason why. So sometimes people will ask me, like, how do you make connections at your company? And some things I often tell them is try to connect with either people who are at the same level as you or who are also new to the company, because then that kind of takes away that concept of seniority a little bit, and you can be a bit more direct and a bit more friendly. Or other people who are a bit more international minded. You can sometimes be a bit more casual with. Oftentimes they also like the connection and are very, want to reminisce about the time they spent overseas or that side of themselves. And so that can be a really good way to get some support or to make some friends, connections at your company, and kind of overcome the hierarchy, if you will.
Right. I think it's becoming more common, especially at gaishike companies, where there will be a foreigner or foreigners in the company working. But what are some things that Japanese people should know about, working with Westerners, so they can better accommodate foreign workers, I guess?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones is just that there's so many mindsets that are different culturally. And just try to be curious and kind, because people often, they are trying their best and some things they just might not know. And so to always approach it from a standpoint of, is it possible you don't know about this? And it is possible, because Westerners or some foreigners, they can be quite direct as well. And you might just have to be very, very direct with them. But try to do it in as kind a way as you can and help them learn to do their job within that Japanese organization, because it doesn't come naturally, to be sure. It's something that you kind of have to make work. And the more help they can get from the Japanese side, the more successful they are going to be, the more successful and happy everyone is going to be. So yeah, I would approach it that way rather than, oh my gosh, this guy is so meiwaku, or this guy is so mendokusai, or this new foreigner, he's driving us crazy. Just be really clear on how things should be, and if they're having difficulty understanding that, explain the reasons. I think that's a really big one. And one that it took a long time for me to understand in Japan is that in Japan, you're supposed to just know. It's that kuki o yomu. You're supposed to read the air and just naturally know what you're supposed to do. And that's impossible for foreigners. It's like understand 10 out of one thing being said, or that Japanese phrase. But like we literally hear one thing. So the other 9 things go missing unless someone kind of clues us in as to what we're supposed to know in that circumstance. So yeah, just explaining the reasons why things are a certain way was one thing that came up countless times. Actually, when I was working at a huge Japanese manufacturing company, with the overseas staff, things would be kind of told to them by the headquarters as how things have to be, or things that just made no sense when they were telling me. But then they found out that there was actually a client in Japan that was really important to that company. And that's why they did things in a way that wasn't profitable to the subsidiary. But no one was telling them that. So everyone just thought, why is headquarters making this decision that is basically screwing us over and making it impossible to get us our numbers? So explaining really, really helps, I think, for people to have more peace and to get them to cooperate with you. Or even if they still don't agree, to at least then move forward in a compromise rather than people just keep going the direction that they're going and not really dealing with the issue at hand.
I think that's incredibly important, what you just said. I think, especially, I think being curious, I think that's a very good mindset to have. I think Japanese people, whenever they approach a foreigner, I think they operate based off of stereotypes that they tend to have. And one of them, the language ability of the said foreigner. I've grown up in Japan, but I don't look Japanese. So even now, I still get some people who assume that I don't speak Japanese. The off comments like, "Nihongo jouzu desu ne," when I'm just, ordering something off the menu. What are some stereotypes that you've faced, and where do you think that those come from? It's a tricky question, but
Yeah, it's interesting because I've been here for so long. I've kind of forgotten some of them. But I mean, I have been asked, I got asked a lot of interesting questions when I was teaching English,
Yeah.
actually. But I guess one of them is not so much a stereotype. I often got people saying that my skin was very white, which kind of made me do some mental gymnastics. So I think as a white person growing up in the States, there's often things I think as I don't want to offend anyone of color. So I'm very careful of what I say, and especially in the current environment as well. But then having lived in Japan for so long, I was like, wait, can they say that? Or like, and so like having that kind of coaching mindset or that openness and curiosity, it's more like they just think that that's a compliment here. And so I should just say, oh, thank you. Or I should say, like, did you know in the States, I could try to explain, why we don't tend to talk about skin color because it could potentially come across as offensive or, you never know. But a lot of times I'll just kind of sidestep it and be like, oh, thanks. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, but stereotypes. Well, it's not a stereotype, but Americans talk a lot. And I learned my husband, I think it drives him a bit crazy because he's Japanese. So he'll sometimes be like, okay, Katie, can you give people other people a turn? So I think some people are just not as aware of that when they first come, especially, or when you grow up in a society where it's normal to like cut each other off or even to talk over each other. Oh my gosh, when I call home to my family, sometimes I can barely get a word in edgewise because I've learned to be more patient and wait my turn or to be more respectful and to let other people speak. So it is a stereotype in some ways, but it is true. And I think a lot of people, that's really hard to overcome what your brain has been doing for its whole life and your speaking patterns or how you interact with other people. So I could see how some Japanese people would be like, oh gosh, I don't want to go to nomikai with, so-and-so because he's just going to talk the whole time, or he doesn't read the air and he just talks about things that we shouldn't talk about with colleagues or in the workplace. And so yeah.
I definitely agree with the. I think I would phrase it a little bit different. I think Americans are more comfortable voicing their opinions. They have confidence that their opinions matter, and Japanese people are, the almost exact opposite of that. I think they're good at getting things right, but it's I think a binary system where you're either right or you're wrong, and your opinion doesn't really matter that much. So I think it's an interesting dynamic, and I think foreigners have a tough time understanding why are Japanese people so shy about this, and it goes the other way as well. I'm curious about your kind of family dynamic, but what is the common language used in your household? My household, we use a mix. We always use a mix. We called it Japan English. It was a mix of both. What is it like?
Yeah, so it's an interesting dynamic here because I am fluent in Japanese, although I have to say I'm really glad we're not doing the interview in Japanese today because I have not used Japanese professionally for 2 years, and there's definitely a lot of polishing that needs to happen before I do. But yeah, in our household, so my husband's actually also fluent in English, having studied overseas for 2 years and using it in his work. So it's been very interesting raising a child here because I had seen a lot of people already raising half Japanese children long before we even thought about having a child. And one of my biggest concerns was like his identity and, if he was going to be able to become a native English speaker living in Japan. And so there's a lot of feeling from me that I need to be very disciplined to only speak English to him, or that we need to be really concerned about his English education. We've thought about putting in international schools, but then hearing from some people that if you put your kid in international school, a lot of times you're setting them up for a very boring childhood because they're going to spend all day in English and probably going to spend more money to put them in a Japanese gakudo afterwards so that they can pick up the Japanese. So it's actually quite challenging to expect that of a child. So I've been trying to adjust my own expectations, but also thinking about less about language and more about what kind of identity we want to allow him to have. I'm also a member of a Facebook group that has a lot of half Japanese people in it. And it's very interesting seeing some of them who sometimes post about how, sad they are that they're not bilingual, that they didn't learn Japanese, or that, this is an English speaking group. So it's mostly saying that they never learned to speak native level Japanese, or even some of them didn't learn it really at all. So I really don't want that for our son. I really want him to be able to be in touch with both sides of his identity so that he can have as many opportunities as he wants in the future to kind of incorporate either of those in his future and professional life. So in a long-winded answer to your question, we speak both. I really try to be disciplined with English, although his daycare randomly is becoming an international daycare from next year. And so once he enters the Sansaiji class, which is about a year and a half from now, he will have a native English speaking teacher, and the assistant will be Japanese, I believe. And then all the students will most likely be Japanese. So he's going to have, I think, a good balance of that exposure in terms of English and Japanese. And then that can also take a lot of the pressure off of me and my husband about which language we have to speak in. And it can just be a bit more natural.
Right.
So,
I've noticed a few global or like eikaiwa daycares in Tokyo. I lived in Tokyo for several years, but I saw more and more of those pop up, and I think it's an interesting. I think it's an interesting move. I think teaching another language at a younger age, I think definitely help. Because English is not Japanese people's strong suit. Yeah, I think I'd be very interested to have a follow-up chat with you about raising a half kid as a half kid myself. But I want to move a little bit more towards I want to transition into kind of workplace issues, things like this. So
yeah,
you've mentioned you've faced power harassment in the past. I can relate to that because I went through that with one of my Japanese bosses. But what was that experience like for you, facing power harassment?
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about it before, but I've actually been power harassed. I've had maybe 2 experiences with power harassment itself, and also a couple experience of being in like a corrupt work environment. And so, yeah, it's really hard. And I think one of the experiences was in the States. So there were different things at stake that time. But it was a job using Japanese in the States. So I think part of me was heartbroken that I had finally found a job using Japanese, but I knew I had to leave it because I could not let someone treat me like that every day. So after talking with HR and after talking to the person in question and seeing nothing change, I basically was like, I've done what I could. I tried to set boundaries, and now it's time to cut loose. And some people can't do that. They'll just stay in that environment, and their physical health, their mental health will suffer in a lot of cases. Another instance was when I was in Japan, actually. And so there were different things at stake. It was like, if I don't work here, what am I going to do? Do I move back to the States? Do I stay here? I have some other goals. What do I do about those? Do they even matter anymore? So that was really hard, being power harassed in that circumstance, with like the amount of work that I was doing and expectations being set that I needed to work Saturdays as well on a regular basis, actually every week, and me not being at all okay with that and saying, if you need someone to work Saturday, you need to hire another person. That being said, like, even though it was so much of a traumatic experience and so stressful and so hard on me at the time, I know a lot of people wouldn't necessarily even put those boundaries in place, or they might not try again. They might talk one time with their boss or one time with a colleague and then be like, well, not going to change. So it is what it is. And, in some cases they do end up quitting, and that may be the best way to go. But in other cases, people just get really stressed, or, in Japan, there's like the suicide rate is insane. And I think a lot of that has to do with, I need to set boundaries, or I know I need to do this, but I just can't make myself have the conversation. Or even if I do, it's not going to go well. And also the identity. I never had that concept of my identity is this company.
Mm.
But in Japan, where lifetime employment, historically has been such a big thing, a lot of people, if they've worked for a certain company, like that is their identity. They're like, I'm a manager at such and such company.
Mm.
If I quit this job, or if I were to do something else, I'm going to lose that.
Mm.
And I can't imagine myself being anything else.
Mm.
So there's so much pressure, I think, that people put on themselves based on what they think is the way things should be, or expectations they have for themselves, or inability to see a different path.
Right. That's that the thing you mentioned about the identity. I think that hits home. I think a lot of Japanese people that I've met, they tie to their identity to the letters that are written on their meishi. That's a big part of their identity, and either changing that or losing that does a huge number on their, I guess, confidence and their mental state. I think it's such a tricky thing, because when you talk to someone, the person you're talking about is someone who's in a position of power. So it's not always straightforward who you should talk to and how you should approach it. Leaving your company isn't always straightforward, because, okay, do you have your resume ready? Do you have a job lined up? It's obviously a very tricky question. But what are some things that you've, what are some advice, what are some pieces of advice that you've given to people going through tough situations like that?
Yeah, I mean, the most important ones is to think about what's really important to you, and nail that down. Set up those conversations, figure out who you need to talk to. It may be that talking to HR, talking to your boss is not enough. You might have to talk to your colleagues. It's almost like nemawashi to get yourself out of a situation that you're in and try to get people on your side. But yeah, and kind of set yourself up to be okay with that uncertainty again, is that you might not end up staying at that job, or you might be able to work through this issue and stay there. And to accept that neither answer is necessarily right. If you have a clear answer, if you're like, no, leaving is the right answer, then that's great that you can then take steps towards that. But when you can't decide, that's when you are potentially putting yourself in a situation where your mental health is going to really suffer. So yeah, taking action, getting people on your side, doing whatever you can to try and move forward. And also managing your emotions is so important, because if you're blaming yourself even a tiny little bit, then that's not good. It's much better to be taking actions to get out of that. If there's any like regret or feelings of blame, you need to work through that and figure out what's really at stake here and what's really important and how you can move forward. So, yeah.
I think that's incredibly important, especially the emotions part, because I mean, without actions, you can't really, change anything. Circumstances are circumstances, and you have to propel yourself forward. And then what propels yourself forward tends to be positive emotion. So, being able to generate those positive emotions and keep those negative emotions that hold you back in check is widely important. Are there any sort of tips, techniques that you give to your the people that you coach to help them better manage their emotions?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. That's one of the big things that I do is actually mindset work, because I feel like mindset is so important across all areas of coaching, whether it's career related, having the mindset to even apply for a job. There's times in the past where I thought, oh, I can't apply for that job. And my coach was like, why not? And I was like, oh, but I've only been coaching 2 years and da-da-da. And she's like, yeah, so? And then when you think about it that way, it's like you're holding your own self back. So mindset is just so important. And so mindset work, it's really, really hard to explain. I usually do like this over multiple sessions and do like a whole hour session on it just to explain it. But the idea that the thoughts that you're having are driving your feelings and your results, because a lot of people have a lot of difficulty wrapping their heads around this concept, or they don't want to wrap their head around the concept. They want to blame their circumstances. But the reality is that the way you think about something is actually going to impact how you feel and how you show up. Like if you think before a job interview, I'm not good enough for this job. You're probably going to get nervous. You're going to be flustered. You might not take the time to prepare properly. And then you'll be beating yourself up and wasting time in that kind of cycle of unhelpful thoughts. And you'll show up to the interview. And if you're not confident and prepared and feel flustered, you're not going to come across as a confident and capable person. And so that's just one example of the way that thinking beforehand, what am I feeling about this job? What do I need to think about it instead if I'm thinking that I'm not the best candidate? How can I think? In what ways might I be the best candidate? And trying to switch it around so that you can motivate yourself to do the work so that you can prepare as best as properly or best as possible, and then show up and do the interview from a confident place. Because then it's going to give you a totally different impression on that company compared with what you were thinking before. And so kind of knowing that if you're prone to getting nervous or if you're prone to feeling like you're not confident or you're not good enough, that you can actually rewire your brain. There's research showing we can rewire our own brains. We don't have to sit with the way the person, if we as a child were the shy one, or just, oh, I'm an introvert, so that's why I don't deal with people. It's like, okay, you're saying you're an introvert as an excuse not to deal with people. But if you just, challenge yourself to deal with people on a regular basis and try to pick out what you enjoyed about each of those experiences, you could then motivate yourself to get used to dealing with people, which is something I wanted to say. I was a huge introvert growing up. And now, like, when I tell people that, they're like, no, you're not, you're an extrovert. And so I think I've actually kind of started switching over on the spectrum between introvert and extrovert as a survival technique. Because if I had stayed an introvert in Japan, I wouldn't have made any friends. I wouldn't have had a support network. I wouldn't have been able to succeed in my work. I wouldn't have the job I have now. So if I had said to myself, I'm an introvert, I can't teach English, I can't be a management trainer because that involves speaking in front of people, which scares me. And I don't know how to make friends because I'm an introvert and I'm too shy to reach out. My life would be totally different. I probably wouldn't be where I am today or happy with my life, essentially. So
I can totally relate to the introversion part. I've always been very, very shy. I'm very self-conscious because my face flushes, so I always get about that.
I'm the same. It's funny.
My most traumatic experience growing up was when I made a big speech in front of the whole school when I was graduating high school. I could just feel my face just like and that just made me more self-conscious, and it just becomes a cycle. But recruitment definitely helped for me because it got me uncomfortable enough, and it kind of forced me to kind of break out of that shell. So I can relate to the introversion part. Yeah, I think you have to keep yourself uncomfortable, right?
Yeah, for sure. And that's so funny because I have the exact same problem, and I feel bad for my son because he definitely inherited my light skin tone, so he's probably going to have the same one as well. But I think like Japanese people think it's cute, right? When you turn pink, cute, so just try to own it. If someone out there who also is prone to flushing, just think how cute you look and just own it and keep going, because there's really no benefit to thinking about the fact that you're flushing or your face is flushed.
Yeah, exactly. I want to ask a little bit about habits, because habits are something that I'm very curious about. The habits that you have your coachees do on a daily basis to help with their confidence, clarity, and whatnot?
Yeah. So one of them, I actually wrote down a list so that I don't forget. But a lot of them are things I do myself. Like I want to get put out there that I'm a person in transition, definitely. Like with a 2-year-old, I'm transitioning every day as my son changes and has new needs and has new abilities to communicate, or suddenly is having temper tantrums over things that don't make sense to me because he's frustrated about his feeling of lack of control. Or, just being a parent in Japan. And I think the biggest one is like starting a business during a worldwide pandemic. It's a lot of stuff going on. And there's not a lot of certainty in it. And there is a feeling of instability because it's constant change, right? And it's not stable yet. So some things that I do, aside from I work with my own coach, I truly believe in walking the talk. If I'm in transition and I'm selling transition coaching, I totally believe that working with a coach is one of the best ways to get through it. And that's why I work with my own coach and understand that I might not be able to handle everything perfectly as it comes. And she can help me with that. So, but yeah, I set 3 things every day. And I have my clients do this too if they ask questions about time management or that kind of thing. I set 3 things every day that are really important to get done, not just because they're due that day, but things that are going to contribute to the bigger long-term goals that I have. So I do this every week as well. To what degree did I work towards those long-term goals with those 3 things? I do it on a monthly basis. I try to do it quarterly as well, and just kind of seeing what kinds of things that I'm not really comfortable or that are just not on autopilot that I need to be scheduling in order for them to actually happen. So that 3 things thing has really helped me because I am a list maker. And if I have a list of like 100 different things that I'm supposed to be doing in my business in theory in order to be successful, I will get so overwhelmed that some days I'll do nothing. So instead I circle 3. Like if I can get all 3 of these done by the end of the day, and even if I can't get all of them done, but I can take steps towards them, then that's enough. And then I can feel confident in myself with the way that I handled my day. And I can also think about what didn't work. So I congratulate myself on what did work, think about how to do it better, but also think about what didn't work and how I could improve it. So instead of being like, well, that didn't go well, I could have done that better, now I'm depressed. It's like, that didn't go well, but that's okay because I'm starting a business in a global pandemic with a 2-year-old, and that's really hard. And so I need to acknowledge that I'm doing the best that I can. But this is how I want to do it differently next time. And these are the steps I'm going to put into place now so that I can make sure that happens, so that this doesn't happen again. So those are some really big things for me, is just constantly trying to improve and to really set effective steps to take every day. And then this one's a habit, I guess, sleep. I think sleep is so huge. I didn't realize how important sleep was until I didn't have it for 2 years with my son. And it literally slows down your brain. It's like my brain, some days I could not function. I could not recall words or names, or like I was coaching during this time too, when I had my son waking up multiple times at night and was getting some nights like 4 hours of sleep that was broken. And your brain stops functioning. One fact I learned in my coaching course actually was that when you consistently get less than 7 hours of sleep a night, it has the same effect on your brain as being intoxicated. And I definitely find that to be true. I'm not a drinker myself. I actually can't drink. But yeah, it literally makes you so that you're slow. You forget things, or you put things. There were a lot of times I felt like I was ADHD. I still feel that sometimes, like I would just not prepare properly and then be late for things. And yeah, so yeah, sleep is just so important. Getting enough sleep on a regular basis so that you are setting yourself up to be healthy, to be, putting your brain in the best condition possible to get you through the day. And also exercise is a really big one. And I know that's one that like everyone probably already knows, but if you're not feeling happy with your life, or you're feeling upset about things, and you're consistently not setting those 3 things, getting enough sleep and getting exercise, even if it's just a little dance party for 5 minutes, like just go outside and go in the bathroom or whatever, turn on your headphones, just dance in the bathroom for 5 minutes, because that's going to help get those like happy hormones flowing that are going to help you get through things. So if you're not doing any of these 3 things, I would always say do these first. And then if you can't get yourself to do these, or if you cannot find the motivation to do them consistently, that's where you can get a ton of value out of hiring a coach. Because a coach is going to help you break down exactly why these things aren't happening, what mindsets are getting in the way, what thoughts are you having, are you letting yourself sit in your feelings? Why are these not happening? What kind of schedule will work better? When could you do exercise that would actually be effective so that you will follow through? How do you need to set up so that you go to sleep on time? Is it something about your sleep environment? Is it something about something you're doing every night? Are you stuck on your phone? like this stuff is just so important. But then, yeah, that mindset work as well. Mindset work and affirmations I do every day. I do it myself. I tell my clients to do it. If I have a client who comes back 2 weeks later and says, yeah, I only did it once, I'm like, you should be doing it every day. It takes 5 minutes max. I do it in my head. I don't even write them down anymore. And so when you start doing that, you start catching yourself. And you get out of those self-sabotaging behaviors, such as like sitting and eating ice cream for an hour because you feel depressed about work or something like that. Sometimes that can be helpful, but sometimes it's more helpful to think about what you could do if you do have pressing things that you need to do instead.
Awesome. I was going to ask you how you manage to handle a ton of clients and raise a 2-year-old at the same time, but I'm starting to figure out why. I mean, I understand that you have a couple seminars coming up. Could you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah. So I've now done, I think, like 3 seminars. So I haven't done a whole lot of them. And I have done a couple of group coaching programs. But my kind of takeaways were that it is really hard for people to find time, you know, for a full group program and to have it for multiple people and for them to have similar enough things that they want to work on. And so that was kind of my takeaway, is that I want to try holding these one-off seminars and just see how they help people. And so I chose 2 topics that I see consistently coming up on different Facebook groups and, you know, in talk that I hear from friends and acquaintances of things that people are consistently having difficulty with. And so one is called Should I Stay or Should I Go? I really wish I had the song playing in the background right now. But yeah, should I stay or should I go? Because I see so many people posting about how they're struggling here, how they frequently have like unhelpful thoughts about like, do I really want to stay in Japan? And so I know my business is called Home in Japan, but that doesn't mean that Japan is the right home for everyone forever. And so I think this seminar will be really helpful for people who frequently feel like they're not happy in their life, or if they feel like I did before, where they're like, when is my real life going to start? I think a lot of expat spouses can sometimes feel this way. If they're not really doing what they want to do in life, the first year might be really fun, but after that, it's like, when do I get to start living my life? Or people who've just stayed here a really long time. Some of them maybe they've worked in English teaching for a long time, but they're not happy with that. Or they're stuck in like the corporate grind and they don't know how to get out, but they're not happy with staying where they are. So this one is going to be centered around a positive psychology exercise that's a lot of fun, I think. And it helps people to really think about how much of the way they're thinking about things is based on where they are and how much of it is based on what they can control. So that should be a lot of fun. And then the other program or seminar that I'm doing is about relationships with Japanese people, because I see a lot of people who struggle in relationships with Japanese people. Again, a lot on Facebook, different groups. And what I often want to say is that sometimes what I see they're complaining about is completely cultural. So if you could truly believe that what is happening is cultural and is based on the fact that you've grown up in different cultures or different families that have different values, that believe different things, how might you think differently? Or how might you be more curious and approach a situation differently? Because I see a lot of complaining, and the sad side of things, people getting divorced and international marriages breaking up and kids going overseas. And, you know, having my own son, that breaks my heart, because like I could never imagine taking him away, like in my mind, taking him away from my husband. He loves my husband. He's an amazing father. And like, you know, no matter what, I would really want to make, you know, have a life where he could be with both of his parents. Not to judge people who do make that decision. But like when I see the same issues coming up over and over and complaints being made, it's like there's obviously some awareness that's not working here. It might be that they are not aware, or it could be that their spouse is unaware and is not putting the effort in to fix it. And so this session is going to be centered around talking about limiting beliefs people have, and how sometimes we do cut our nose off to spite our face because we want to complain instead of work on our marriage,
Mm.
or work on our relationship with a boyfriend or girlfriend.
Mm.
So this one is centering around limiting beliefs that I frequently see coming up. And I'm actually going to ask people what kind of beliefs they have about situations that they're in, and also setting values.
Mm.
And we probably will talk a little bit about culture, but I don't want it to focus on culture, because culture is never an excuse to not do what you need to do to succeed in your marriage or to have the life that you want to have.
Mm. Right. And
So,
what are these seminars going to be?
yes. So I don't have one is on the 17th and one is on the 22nd.
Okay.
They're both at 7 p.m.
Mm.
And tickets can be purchased on Piatix. So it's a bit tricky to get access to those, but I will be posting them on Tokyo Expat Network, I believe, next Friday, when they have their monthly show it off week.
Okay.
But anyone is welcome to reach out to me as well, and I can send you a link to access.
Okay, and we can have the links down in the video description as well.
Perfect. That's great.
Could you tell us a little bit about your coaching practice as well? I noticed on your website you have several different lines of coaching services. You have communication, transition, and one other, I think it was life coaching? Personal development.
Yes.
A little bit about that?
So it's really interesting, actually, because I'm a certified life coach, and I also am just about to get an ACC with the International Coach Federation, which is the largest association of professional coaches in the world. A lot of people might not know, but wellness organizations and corporations frequently do hire professional coaches, and that is one of the things they look for, is that ICF credential. So I should have that within the next few weeks, which is super exciting. It's something I've worked towards for the last over 18 months, really hard to make happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So these coaching tools and the kind of coaching process, basically, it can be used in so many ways. And so I'm kind of marketing myself as a transition coach for the most part, but it can also be used by people who want to have some personal growth and they want to push themselves more. Such as I'm coaching someone who's trying to get a promotion. Some people are trying to plan careers internationally, and they have a lot of questions about what's the right thing to do. Should they be close to their family? Should they sacrifice their career or their spouse's career to be close to their family to do that and go back home? Or is it right for them to continue to pursue a career and family life in Tokyo? There's also people who, are students even that I've coached, and they're thinking about what kind of career do they even want to have in Japan, or do they want to start their career in their home country before coming over? One of my clients hired me just to kind of help him get in the motion so that he could move back to Japan, and he just found a job and is actually coming over here in a couple months, which is fantastic. So for him, it was like hiring a coach was going to guarantee that he took the steps to make that happen. And indeed it did. So there's so many different ways that you can use coaching, and transition coaching is kind of my specialty. But I do offer coaching programs as well as one-off coaching. So people can sign up for a trial session and see what they think of the coaching process and the self-awareness process. And then there's also options to sign up for 4 sessions or 10 sessions. And you can do like a short-term program, or you can even do long-term programs. I also do business coaching. So if someone is setting up a business and even just wants support, I know it's really helpful having support myself in my business to have someone to, throw ideas at and kind of hear their perspective, or say, I'm thinking about doing this, but I haven't really taken action and I don't know why. And kind of dig through what's actually happening with the thought process and the motivation there. It could be that they're not confident in their program yet, or it could be that they actually want to do this, but that's what they're afraid to do. So they're instead just thinking about doing something else and not actually doing it. So there's so many ways that you can use coaching. If someone's really new to self-awareness coaching, sometimes I'll even spend the first few sessions just doing like personality assessment. Like, what kind of strengths do you have? What kind of weaknesses do you have? What do you think is your base personality? And if your goal is this, what kind of changes have to be made in who you are and characteristics about yourself, or habits that you have, or ways you're thinking about this situation in order to start taking the steps to get there. So yeah, it's basically packages of support where I do professional coaching, but I also am happy to do some mentoring as well, based on having 15 years experience in Japan in my career. And even supporting, new moms. Sometimes just having someone to support you when your husband's always gone, if he's working at a Japanese company or if he has a really intense job when you're living overseas, can be, more helpful than we know. Having someone to check in on you before things progress to a certain point. There's a really great graphic that was shared recently, and it kind of showed the different phases between thriving, surviving, struggling, and in crisis. And a friend of mine actually reposted it, and I thought it was really interesting what she said, is that if you think about these different stages or situations, a lot of people would often say they're thriving or in the surviving stages. But if they actually look at the physical manifestations, such as relying on food for comfort or losing sleep over stress or these different types of things, they'll realize they're much closer to crisis than they thought they were, or even like in that struggling phase. And so that was a really big eye-opener. And so it's so important to reach for help when you're in the not the crisis phase, but if you're maybe not thriving, you're in the surviving, or feel like you're starting to dip into the struggling phase, that's when you should reach out to help for a therapist or a coach, or really reassess where you are and where you want to be and make those changes, rather than I'm too busy, I don't have time. Because that's another challenge with even people signing up for coaching or therapy or getting some support. So that's a mindset that, like, if I could get my past self some coaching, I would totally, have done it, because just having that support makes such a big difference. And taking the time to put yourself first and investing, time and money in your mental health or in getting the future that you want, rather than, just hoping for the best and potentially feeling unhappy with your life or unhappy with you are for the next 1 to 5 years.
Awesome. We have your Instagram right underneath your face, but is that the way to reach out to you if people are interested to explore coaching or the seminar? Is that the best way to reach out to you?
Yeah, they're welcome to reach out to me through Home in Japan, my Home in Japan Instagram. I also have a website, which is www.homeinjapan.com. So they can reach out to me through the contact form there, or check out more about my programs as well.
Okay, we'll be sure to have that in the description when we upload the video as well.
Yeah, cool.
I think that's a good place to leave it. Katie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, this is my first time doing podcasts, and I had such a fun time. Thank you so much.
That's awesome. I think we I got some nice insights myself. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for listening.